The addiction enablement cult, it just keeps going and going. And Canada's addiction enablement cult is out of control, and the havoc's spreading. And yes, they're a cult, and that's what I'm going to call them. I mean, how else can we characterize them? No matter how stark the evidence of the failure of their policy gets, they just refuse to face reality. Rather than rethinking the notion that enabling addiction will save addicts, they just keep doubling down as the policies fail and lives are lost. Their ideology, it's become a religion, and they're incapable of reason. Policymakers in the courts have embraced the tenets of the cult, and BC is ground zero. I mean, the courts in BC have declared it a charter right for addicts to consume meth and fentanyl in children's playgrounds. I wish I was making this up. But you'll still be ticketed if you smoke a cigarette within 10 minutes of a doorway. Yes, it's that insane. Then, of course, there's the notion of safe consumption. It's been pushed for years. Drug consumption centers have sprung up in urban centers across the country, and they've invariably been a disaster. The one in Lethbridge, Alberta, got shut down for corruption issues. People are begging for the one in Red Deer to be shut down because it's turned the area into a disaster zone. The centers destroy neighborhoods as the drug dealers follow the addicts and bring their associated crime with them. The safe consumption concept fails as well as the fatal overdoses are continuing to break record levels every year. It's an easy statistic to monitor, unfortunately, and it's pretty undeniable. Addiction is spreading and is killing more people despite the advent of safe consumption centers. The cults also, it's like it's focused on the myth that drug addiction itself is not a condition that must be cured. They see it as something that can be managed, if we just managed it safely. If only addicts could get a pure enough supply of drugs and a nice place to consume them, they'll be living okay. They refuse to admit that the drugs themselves are the problem and propagate the myth that it's only impure street drugs that kill addicts. That leads to their absurd and fatal provision of a safe supply of drugs. There's no such thing as a safe supply of fentanyl or meth. Do they think if a shot of heroin was pure enough, it wouldn't kill the user eventually? Yes, that's actually what they believe. Still, the cultists have gotten their way, and BC's been handing out drugs to addicts like candies. And not only have fatal overdoses risen over there since then, but so has the number of new addicts. The addicts accept the drugs handed out, then trade them with street dealers for stronger drugs. Those dealers then use that nice safe supply to sell and create new addicts, nice fresh ones to keep their business expanding as the other ones die off. Anybody with a grain of common sense could have seen that coming. Anybody but a cultist, that is. RCMP in Prince George, BC recently seized over 10,000 pills. It sounds like most of them were from safe supply prescriptions. Now, BC Premier Eby was quick to claim that the RCMP were mistaken in identifying the source of the drugs as being from safe supply sources. Eby doesn't need evidence to make such a claim, of course. Cultists don't need evidence. Police officers do, however, and their evidence points to the safe supply handouts. The enablement cult has also claimed it's the lack of safe shelters for drug consumption that leads to these deaths. Homeless shelters, you see, they won't allow the consumption of drugs within their facilities, and for good reason. They can hardly help people get back on their feet if they're surrounded by others with rampant drug use around them. Try to convince the single mother who's caught in a shelter to stay there with her kids while she's surrounded by addicts in the grips of meth-induced psychosis. Most of the homeless we see on the streets are addicts. The enablement cultists continually deny that, but one only needs to walk among them for a few minutes and see the pipes and syringes and know that reality. The enablement cult has managed to get funding for and open shelters now in BC where drug consumption is allowed. Yeah, they've done it. They've created the nirvana for addicts that they claim is required. The addicts are given safe supplies, and they have a safe place to consume them, but they can crash there now as well as if it was any other shelter. Now, those shelters quickly turned into dystopian nightmares, and they look like opium dens of old. There's an activist, Ken Dahlgren, I strongly suggest you try and look it up. He got footage from within the PHS Community Services Society Addiction Enablement Shelter in Vancouver, and he posted it on X. Addicts are passed out in different states of inebriation on filthy mattresses on the floor. There's body fluid sprayed on the walls, and shouts and screaming can be heard behind strangely locked doors. It looks like something out of a horror movie. How can anybody tour such a facility and still claim it's helping anybody? I mean, nobody can unless they've embraced the enablement as a religion. They're blind to reality, and the state's funding their delusion. There's not going to be an easy solution to be found for the addiction epidemic. Treatment's limited and expensive, and not all addicts are willing to take part in it. We do know what won't work, though, and that's enablement. The enablement cult is populated by academics, activists, politicians. One thing lacking within that cult, though, are the voices of recovered addicts. They know what won't work, and they support treatment rather than enablement. This cult must be defunded, guys, and we got to shut it down. Until it is, this addiction epidemic is only going to continue to spread and get worse.
I'll turn around. This is Metallica, remember them?
Yeah, it's not good to remember that.
That was a good band, brother.
Sometimes I think that you don't move just like
Totally fucking turn around. What's the rest of these? I just hurt my tooth.
Oh yeah, me too.
Oh.
Are